welcome back to Revolutionary Education with Donte and Jack Hampton. In this video, we'll be going over the discussion questions. In the video description, I'll put the timestamps for each set of discussion questions, though I encourage you to listen to the answers for all 12 questions to get the most out of the discussion. Each question set follows the format of defining the vocabulary term, expanding on your definition using an extending question, and reflecting on the meaning of the vocabulary in a given context. We hope you'll be able to learn more about the key themes of our course using these final questions in each set. They are meant to get you thinking about the course themes and develop a starting point for your opinions on these questions. Don't be shocked if you disagree with us in this first video. We hope to include plenty of historical examples and evidence for why we think these are the correct answers throughout the course. Okay, welcome back. So we are going to start by going over the questions for the Message to the Grassroots speech. And our first question goes with the vocabulary set, our people. The definition question is, reflect on X's meaning when using the phrase our people. Who is his audience, and who is he referring to?
So, I'm going to elaborate on that. X is speaking at a convention for the Northern Negro Grassroots Leadership Conference at a Baptist church in Detroit. His audience is likely Christian, black people who are active in the civil rights movement in the 1960s in Detroit. When he refers to our people, he's speaking to and about black people.
Yeah, so we'll get more into that in the expansion question. But when he talks about his people, our people, he's referring to like him and the audience collectively as all black people.
Yes.
And the second question, expand. Who more specifically does X include in his definition of our people? Who does X think qualifies as his people and who doesn't?
Malcolm X's knowledge of systematic racist systems in America and in European politics led him to categorize people with African heritage and people who identify as black as a part of the Pan-African diaspora. These groups of people both experience white supremacy in their daily lives and commonly are actively seeking political and financial freedom, which is why he calls them our people. There's lots of ways that we can use that or understand that in our daily life. When we talk about our people in our modern context, who do we want to include? For Malcolm X's time, he was right in assuming that it was very difficult to build alliances with communities of colors to white allies and other people and other ethnic groups. But since then, we've had many other brave revolutionaries go forth, like Fred Hampton and others, who have helped bridge that gap. So I think it's important when we talk about modern revolutionary movements and goals that our people should include all people who are in a class struggle, and understanding that to be the primary struggle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so we can get into that a little bit more in the reflection question as well, like who are our people. But I think it would require a little bit more context to say, like, because Malcolm X explicitly in other speeches does not include like Jewish people in his struggle, right?
Yes.
And so I think his tactics, like Black Revolution, we can learn a lot from. But maybe not his rejection of allyship from other POC groups. You know what I mean?
Yes. It's upsetting in a way that it's like, realizing like the times that you lived in, mm-hmm. and people are saying you can't, we're not going to work with you. We're not going to actively like build those community alliances. In a way, if he's just like accepting it, it's like, okay, it is difficult to build these community alliances. I'll give up on it completely. Only black people.
Yeah. And in a sense, like, that's completely understandable. You don't want to waste your time on people who are actively racist, right?
Yes.
But I think Fred Hampton is a good example there because he worked with people who, while they had their active racist tendencies, like poor working class whites, their primary struggle was similar to that of Black people at the time. And in that class struggle, right, they shared a common enemy in the police, in the state. And I think that is a reason to ally with someone, is you share a common goal.
Yes, I agree.
So getting into that reflection question, how can we adapt X's definition of his people to fit our current era and community? Who are your people? Who are not your people? We're going to answer this one as just like as ourselves, but you're free to, obviously, this is a personal reflection, to disagree with our assessment here.
When I use, our people, our movement, I'm including people who are being attacked by the American political power structures and by white supremacy.
In addition to understanding that our struggles may not be exactly the same, but that doesn't mean we can't find similarities between them and form common goals in striving towards socialism, striving towards political upheaval and renewal. The struggle of the capitalist underclass is multiracial in 2023, And so understanding that our struggles have to reflect that. Our revolutionary actions have to reflect that. And that we all have that struggle against oppression in common. And the only way out of that is destruction of that oppressive system. So set 2 corresponds to the vocabulary term Black Revolution. And this is what X is referring to most often throughout the speech when he talks about what a real revolution is. And so we wanted to make sure we all understood what that meant, and how it contrasts with what he calls the Negro Revolution.
Yes. X contrasts the Black Revolution and the Negro Revolution as opposing political movements. He expresses disdain and frustration with the tactics, and goals of the dominant nonviolent civil rights movement, the Negro Revolution.
And I think in many ways, he is right to do that. The difference between active, violent revolution, direct action, right, is it's not maybe opposed to, but it exists alongside a dominant, nonviolent, symbolic action type of movement. And those two can work together, but oftentimes we see them oppose each other.
Yes.
And I don't think that's a necessity. I think that nonviolent and symbolic tactics have a good place in political movements. They create the messaging, they create the optics, like we talked about in the lecture video.
Right. There's a good example of direct nonviolent action that we saw today in the news. So there's a wide, expansive amount of climate change protests that's happening now. Last Generation, yes. And they're doing some phenomenal work abroad. It's an international group, but more specifically, I watched a video today about how a large group of young adults in the Last Generation movement shut down roads and bridges by just peacefully, non-violently sitting on the ground, refusing to be moved. And that's a pretty strong direct action when you think about if your main goal is to stop a important part of infrastructure from moving forward. If you're slowing down people from going to work, from like deliveries from being made by trucks, that's going to impact people's bottom line. That is a very good, clear example of direct action. And it is non-violent. So it's important to understand all the different tools that are at our disposal and not inherently dismiss something for being violent or something being non-violent. Understanding how they fit and work together.
Absolutely. And I want to point out, too, that in that example of Last Generation in Germany, their offices were raided by the state, like today.
Yes.
There's no safe political action that is progressive.
Yes.
There is no way out of highlighting the contradictions. That is not going to get you in trouble with the powers that be, with the state.
Right.
And I think that's so important to recognize, because so many of these so-called direct action groups. They don't engage in direct action.
Right.
Even going so far as to reject risky direct actions, or even risky symbolic actions, like the ones that Last Generation participated in.
Right.
You know, there is a place for direct action in a political progressive movement.
Yes.
Is bare minimum.
Bare minimum.
You know?
I think, so I want to branch off of what you just said too, because it's an important part of understanding direct action and symbolic action. Though these are very useful terms, and how we might understand the world around us. But when you are a revolutionary and you are protesting in any capacity, the state is definitely going to look at you as a violent combatant. Whether you are peacefully protesting, whether that protest is legal or illegal, or if you're spray painting graffiti, or if you're doing some other type of action that could be considered illegal, the state is not going to make a distinction between those. It's important that we understand the distinction so that we can have a certain type of impact that we want. But as far as the consequences for direct action and symbolic action, oftentimes they're the exact same.
Mm-hmm. And we see plenty of examples of that in the Atlanta Forest Defenders movement today.
Yes.
Tortuguita, sitting down cross-legged, hands up.
Hands up.
Shot 14 times.
Murdered.
Yes.
Murdered.
And this is their response to a non-violent street medic.
Yes.
Is it going to be more escalated? Can it be more escalated?
Right.
It can't. There is... Murder and murder are the same reaction.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
you know, whether Tortuguita was actively protesting and committing a de-arrest and saving someone from being assaulted, or they just had a sign up, if the response by the state is going to be murder, then you have to look at the situation for what it is.
Mm-hmm. You might as well get something done while you're out there. You know?
Exactly. Yes.
So let's move on to the second question, the expansion question. Explain the tactics and goals of the Black Revolution in X's mind. Compare and contrast these with the tactics and goals of the Negro Revolution. So I want to just outline exactly what he's talking about. That expansion question is what that's for. Tactics of the Negro Revolution include nonviolence, peaceful protest, and other types of symbolic actions. The goals include integration, a seat at the table, negotiation, and compromise. We can see that in places in his speech where he references Black Revolution as having no negotiation, no compromise.
Right.
And so in that case, Black Revolution refers to violent, direct revolution that is for land and independence,
right,
and is brought about by bloodshed. Tactics to bring this about include violence, warfare, direct action. The goals include land, justice, and independence.
The Negro Revolution versus the Black Revolution. It's very clear that the dominant mindset amongst the left is that in line with the Negro Revolution as described by Malcolm X. It's a pacifist, turn the other cheek style of protest where someone is, for example, George Floyd. George Floyd was murdered. And what was the response? We saw people in the streets, the vast, overwhelming majority of people peacefully protesting. You had some people, individuals, choosing to take direct action, and they were swiftly condemned.
By the left as well.
By the left, yes, by the left. By people who would even otherwise agree with them, they're undercutting people who would take direct action to strengthen the word and cause of people demanding justice. When you look at all of these things that are happening, it's unquestionable that people are choosing the non-violent approach. And we can understand too that, when you look at all of these terrorist attacks that are happening, that are being done by Nazis, that are being done. Just the other day, there was I believe Monday, there was a story in the news where the White House was attacked, and a Nazi from Missouri drove a, what was it? It was a truck. tried to drive the truck onto White House property so they could assassinate Joe Biden. It's very clear that the right-wing group in America has no problem using direct action. They have no problem using violence. And those two things are different, because I know we use them synonymously. They are not. But the right wing has no problem using violence or using direct action to push and advocate for their beliefs, whereas the left is more than hesitant. They are scared. They believe it's morally wrong to use direct action or violence. At what point are you going to start saying enough is enough? Well, I can't necessarily get the Nazi movement to completely dissolve, but I can address how I interact with the Nazi movement. I can either sit at home and wait for them to come for me and let them take my neighbors, or I can ally with my neighbors and work together to come up with a plan to address these types of situations. It's really upsetting to understand and look at how so much of American politics on the left, pacifism and turning the other cheek, we go high, they go low, is built into the foundation of leftist politics. And
that's a shame, because it clearly hasn't worked.
Yes, exactly. This Malcolm X speech happened when?
1963.
1963. Okay, none of this is new. And that's one of the most that's really one of the most frustrating aspects of this, okay? You have people who were born, they lived, and they were murdered over these exact issues, okay?
Advocating for the same things that we are.
And
they were buried. That knowledge was buried with them.
When I was a child, there was this piece of wisdom that I received, and I always thought it was real smooth. It was real nice. It was the greatest way to know the path ahead is to ask someone walking back. And so that's like, talk to your elders, talk to people in your community who've experienced the world, and get as much knowledge from everything you can. And we know what our elders say. They can tell you everything that they've done if they were in the streets, and they can tell you it didn't work. The ones who are still alive, at least the ones that we can get to.
The ones that weren't murdered by the AIDS epidemic or by the FBI.
Or the FBI.
With COINTELPRO.
Exactly. Or imprisoned. Or had to flee to Cuba. Or anything like that. So it's important to understand where we are in the world on a historical timeline. And understanding that there is no arc of history. Things don't just magically become better. The device that you're listening to this conversation on, it wasn't certainly going to come into existence. It took generations of people taking science and technology and putting all of their effort to change the world around them to get to the moment that we are now. And you have to understand that politically, you can't just hope that the next year will be better or the next day will be better. You have to actively work with people in your community, get them to understand the severity of the circumstance and how it's not going to fix itself.
There's no assurance that it will be fixed at all without exacting action.
Yes.
Without precise, direct action.
Yes.
And that is a key theme of our course that we're going to keep coming back to, is that direct action is moral, necessary, and achievable.
Yes, all of this is going to be expanded on in future classes and future lessons. Do we want to move on to 2.3?
Yes.
Okay.
This will be the reflection question. Compare the violent tactics of the Black Revolution to the nonviolent tactics of the Negro Revolution. Which do you think are more effective and why?
We've been using the tactics of MLK for 50 years plus. Where did we succeed using those tactics exclusively? Where did we fail using those tactics exclusively? How could we benefit by taking direct action and using that in conjunction with symbolic action? Understanding that direct action doesn't have to be violent, but it could be, and also understanding that the state makes no difference whether something is non-violent or violent or symbolic or direct.
In their response to it, right?
In their response. For set 3, have you heard the word uhuru before? Recall the context in which you heard this word. What sort of political ideas? If you haven't heard this word before, search Uhuru St. Louis and explore the first website to learn more. There is a group called Uhuru Solidarity Movement in St. Louis. Their politics are best described as Pan-Africanism and Black supremacy. From speaking with them and engaging with them at different events, their members are mostly white people who believe their role is to be subservient to the leadership of Black people to repay the harm of chattel slavery on the personal level. X is invoking a different meaning in his speech, since the social context around the word is very different than it was in 1963.
The reason that we wanted to talk about the Uhuru Solidarity Movement in reference to this speech is because he means something totally different.
Yes.
He means Black Revolution. He means the Kenyan Revolutionary Action of the Mau Mau. X was a Black nationalist, yes.
Yes.
The context in which he was a Black nationalist is significantly different
than modern Black nationalism.
Right. Black nationalism today is associated most commonly with the Hotep movement.
Yes.
Where Black men who believe that they are superior to Black women.
Yes.
And extremely homophobic, often anti-Semitic as well.
Yes.
And there's a religious connotation as well that goes in with that.
Yes.
The Black Israelite sort of movement.
Believing that they are the enslaved people that Moses freed from Egypt, and modern day Jewish people who trace their lineage back to enslaved Hebrews in the Bible are doing a stolen valor aspect, and Black people in America are the true Israelite. It's a whole thing. Everybody.
And it's a whole racial essentialist mess, too.
Yes. Just know they're completely different.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
And it doesn't mean that we should discount X's analysis of what Black Revolution is.
Yes.
Is the basic point behind that. So, entirely different context, and you can look into that more. So how does this different context inform the meaning of the word?
Yes. I'd like to expand that a little bit more. A good way of like understanding or looking at things is like looking at the Black Panther Party. The Black Panther Party of the 60s is completely different from the modern day Black Panther Party, who differentiate themselves by going by the new Black Panther Party. The new Black Panther Party is far less interested in socialism, is far less interested in uplifting people in the Black community to protect them from white supremacy, as they are more interested in proving their superiority to white people and wanting complete segregation from white people. So understanding like the roots of the first organization and how it was made to protect Black people from police brutality, and how the second, the new Black Panther Party, doesn't have anywhere near as much lofty and important goals as the first. Understanding those.
I would also say that the new Black Panther Party is defined by what we would call Black capitalism.
Yes.
And like feeding back into that is the goal of
yes.
of that new party, is the fundraising and the quote unquote empowerment of Black people through getting them into capitalist positions of power.
Yes, completely different. And so just it's important when looking back on the past to gain as much knowledge as possible from the wars that were fought, the battles that were won and lost, that we look at the context in which everything is being done and said, so we can better understand where they were then and why we are where we are right now.
So the ways the world has changed since X used the word uhuru in 1963 include the end of legal segregation, the transition to de facto segregation, an end to black capitalism, the status of black people as a permanent and immutable underclass, and now we have a slightly different experience right now where there is a multiracial underclass, though disproportionately occupied by black people, and a multiracial type of capitalism.
Yes.
And I think that's really important because plenty of liberal people think of multiracial or multicultural movements as automatically progressive.
Right.
And we're going to get into that in the next...
There's a black person, so it has to be left. It has to be left wing.
Yeah, and so we're going to get into that in the next reflection question. But the context now for uhuru is basically that it's a false allyship that lets black people take the lead in everything to absolve white people of any decision-making responsibility,
yes.
I would say. X uses the word to promote black consciousness and solidarity with other oppressed people, in this case in colonial Africa, in Kenya.
To throw some more dirt on the modern uhuru movement. This is a very funny conversation that persists. On the left, just because a person is a part of a minority group doesn't mean they know what is inherently best for that minority group.
And it doesn't mean they speak for that minority
group. You can't go up to any random woman and say and have her speak on behalf of all women of all different classes, of all different ethnicities, and say that she will know what's best for them. In the same way, you can't go up to...
And she shouldn't be...
claiming
to know what's best for them.
Exactly. And so when the uhuru movement, when you have upper class, middle class white people going to really conservative black people and saying, tell us what all black people think. Tell us what's in the best interest of all black people. And running with that. That's not the juice. That's not the movement, guy.
Because you know what they're going to tell you? They're going to tell you what is in conservative capitalist interests.
Yes, exactly.
Unless you are speaking to someone who is invested in the well-being of all people.
Yes.
You're not going to get an answer that's going to reflect the well-being of all people.
Yes, exactly.
Which is socialism.
Yes, exactly. If you feel like you've gotten every bit of knowledge about the world from a book that you've just read, you need to read another book. All right, you need to pick up another book. You need to talk to a different person. If you feel like you've talked to one person, you've gotten every answer you ever needed for the rest of your life, you're not getting it. Especially if you talk to the American black person, an average American black man who's been unfortunately, because of systematic racism, has a harder time going to secondary educational classes. They have a harder time getting to free education. They have a harder time being in positions where they can have greater knowledge to expand the reasons why they are in poverty, or the reasons to why they are an oppressed group to begin with. You can't just go to a group of people who are systemically oppressed and have had every bit of knowledge taken away from them so that they don't know why they're systemically oppressed, and expect them to have all the keys to the kingdom and know exactly how they should get out of it, you know?
Mm-hmm. It takes away responsibility from your own learning and your own education.
Yes.
It puts like the mythical monolithic minority on a pedestal,
yes, it does.
on a dehumanizing pedestal that denies them their ability to be wrong.
Yes,
which
exactly.
is so offensive.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, black people can be wrong, as anyone can. Should, an example, should Joe Biden be able to speak for all white people? Should Kamala Harris be able to speak for all black people?
Explain your opinion on the following statement. The statement is, any political movement that would benefit black people would improve the future for all people. And so my opinion on this is that no, it would not. But let us explore why that is. So I left the statement a little bit ambiguous because I wanted to leave room for interpretation. Because any movement that is a movement that claims to benefit black people doesn't automatically even benefit black people.
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
But further than that, a progressive movement that claims to put black people at the forefront not only does not necessarily do that, but does not actually maybe know what is best for black people.
Right.
Because what is best is socialism.
Yes. So, a very good example of how this could be taken in a negative way is how black capitalism, yes, the black community would be better off if you had more people who were upper class, middle class, and could achieve a secondary education. But if all of that still has to exist within a capitalist framework, then we're only going to have a new permanent underclass of people. You'll have some people make it up to the top, but you'll have what is increasingly happening in this late stage capitalist America of 2023, where you're having more people who are unemployed. You're having more people who are can't find a place of work that will pay them what they're worth. They can't get health care. They can't have any of their basic needs met. If everything was equal in America, as far as black people were hired at the same rates, fair rates that they were for every other minority group, and black people were able to get health care on equal aspects of white people, that's still not good enough. There is a massive amount of suffering that is inherently linked because of capitalism, and you can't just say that, well, my black capitalist movement is going to improve the lives of some black people, because as long as it's a capitalist system, exploitation is built into the model of your economic system, there will be suffering. You have to understand, socialism is the only way that we can get a permanent uplifting of all people in America.
Yeah, and it will impact black people more because black people disproportionately make up the underclass of capitalism.
Yes.
And that benefit will be for everyone in that underclass.
Yes.
Which is currently multiracial, though disproportionately black. And taking the black billionaire as an extreme example, think about it this way. Does that person's financial success in any way help poor black people pay their rent?
Right.
Does their financial success make your life better in any meaningful way?
Let's say we had 2 Oprahs. Oh my God, we have 2 Oprahs. Is Oprah doing anything for the average black man, average black woman, average black child? No, because she's a billionaire. Her interests could not be more diametrically opposed to anything that the working class person would need or experience. It doesn't matter. We would not do better off if we had more Ellens, if we had more wealthy lesbians, more wealthy people and LGBT people. Because as long as we have the same capitalist system, black people and other minority communities are still going to be oppressed. They're still going to be manipulated and abused. It'll just be
multiracial.
It'll be multiracial,
Yeah, and that is not enough.
That is not enough.
And it is not what we will settle for.
Yes, exactly.
So, turn the other cheek is the final vocabulary phrase that we wanted to go over. The definition question is, where have you heard the phrase turn the other cheek before? What idea does the phrase communicate? And what political positions or tactics go with this phrase? So, the turn the other cheek mentality is associated with, like, Jesus Christ in the Christian Bible and the Jewish Torah. And this phrase communicates a desire to be a martyr before you are a violent actor. And nonviolence, negotiation, and compassion for your enemy go with the phrase. And as far as what that means in practice, we'll get into that in the next question. Expanding on the logic behind turn the other cheek. Even if you don't agree with it, could a political movement benefit from this approach? Why or why not? Going over, like, what the appeal of turn the other cheek really is
moral high ground.
Moral high ground, right. This inability or lack of desire to defend oneself could help messaging, could help optics, and that's what a lot of liberals see in it, right? But this only happens if there is widespread symbolic action. If the dominant movement is nonviolent and it relies on messaging alone. As we talked about with the lecture section, symbolic actions are most useful when they correspond with or help direct actors. And so what that means for turn the other cheek is basically that they're rejecting direct actors completely. And the utility of martyrdom is the inspiration it provides for others in prompting them to take direct action. So it's not necessarily useful on its own. But the appeal is still there because it allows you, like you were saying, moral high ground.
Moral high ground.
For whatever that's worth.
No, yeah, it's really insufferable that in modern day left-wing politics, the moral victory matters more than the actual victory for whatever it is. For example, it's like when Donald Trump said something racist. Donald Trump accuses Mexicans of being bringing crime and black people are destroying their cities. And Democrats shame him, but they do nothing to oppose his legislation. Somehow we're supposed to look at that as a victory because they touted him saying, tisk, tisk, that was bad. That was wrong of you to say that. That was mean. And do nothing politically. That's a failure of liberalism, I believe, of valuing the optics of a situation more than the outcome of a situation.
Right. It rejects the material reality of, like, our conditions and our circumstance and favors the moral high ground as opposed to, and often in contrast with, what would actually benefit people. The last reflection question is, explain why X shows disdain and frustration with the prevailing nonviolent civil rights movement of 1963. Even if you don't agree, could a political movement benefit from his approach? Why or why not?
Right. And I really want the audience to really reflect on this. Understand that we did not get to where we are by happenstance or accident. The prevailing political mindset amongst the left is that of, as Malcolm X described it, of the Negro movement, of a pacifist, nonviolent, mostly symbolic movement. Understanding that can help you understand if we are still dissatisfied, if inequality is still as perverse, if not in more circumstances than you actually believe, more prevalent than what they were in the 60s. We have more people incarcerated now than there were in the 60s. More income inequality persists now than it was in the 60s. If you can understand that symbolic action, nonviolent action for over 50 years is what has landed us in this position, then you need to start thinking outside the box. I do not know who actually said this quote, okay? I don't know who said this quote. But people like to say it all the time. They say that, if the definition of insanity is trying the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. We need to try something new. We need to try something different.
Absolutely. And that something new has been tried before. It's just new to the American left.
It's new to the American left. Yes, exactly. When you understand, it's new to us. Exactly. Other countries, so much as inequality persists, They still have health care.
Mm-hmm.
They still have paid leave and maternity leave. They still have unions.
How sad is that? How frustrating is that? And you can begin to empathize with his call for direct action, his call for violent revolution.
Right.
And I think that massive political change rests on our acceptance of that method.
Right. Oh gosh, it's sinking in even more for me. Things were better off 50 years ago, and they were calling for direct action revolution. Things are worse than ever now, and we're like, hold on, turn the other cheek. No.
And you heard in the video or in the audio rather, how warm the reception was at this non-violent Christian conference.
Yes.
For direct violent revolution.
Yes.
They were ready, so I don't understand why liberals aren't.
Well, thank you everybody for tuning in and listening. See you soon.
All right, thanks guys.